Welcome to Knowledge Unbound. Episode 7 is about to go live. Knowledge Unbound is a podcast, an interview podcast, where we talk to people who do transformative work, change-making work, social justice work, equity work in science education and education in general. We are generously funded by the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. We are overseen by the Rios Institute for Racially Just, Inclusive, Open STEM Education. I am generously joined by my favorite producer, my only producer, Mr. Segev Amasai.
The one and only.
I want to say a special thank you. Segev is in finals week. I am not jeopardizing his finals by having him help me record his intro and outro, but I just want you all to show Segev some love. Computer engineering major class of 2025. Segev, what's up?
Oh, doing pretty well. I can't say I'm not, a little stressed out by the finals, but hey, it's something that everyone has to go through. Yeah. But I do want to, should I bring that up or should I let you bring that up? Because remember, I said the one and only, but this week we have, there's not just one interviewee, but there are two.
Well, yeah, you brought it up, so I guess you answered your own question.
But it is what it is.
But they're good guests, and actually, this is going to be a great conversation. It's a good segue because, these are people, I know you have finals. Most people have finals. It's kind of one of those staples of college life, but these are two instructors who think really differently about what it means to teach a classroom. And I guess what I really loved about their story, which you'll hear over the next hour, is how their journey to writing this very famous book called Inclusive Teaching, West Virginia Press, came from the experiences that they had with students like yourself, right? And what they saw they were doing and what could be better. So as always, my friends, we have a conversation with them, have them tell their story to the writing of the book, and the story for what education could look like in general. So welcome to another episode of Knowledge Unbound. I hope you enjoy. This is a great day. I came all the way up to Duke campus, was lost. I'm going to blame one of my guests for that. You'll find out in a second. I mean, I did have the wrong time, but Duke could be a confusing campus, depending if you've ever been here. Beautiful campus, though, and you should come. And Dr. Kelly Hogan was kind enough to get us some space in a recording studio here. So I'm here with Dr. Kelly Hogan and Dr. Viji Sathy, who are the authors of the book Inclusive Teaching, which right now should have made the rounds on every single college campus on the planet. Viji, did I pronounce your name correctly? I have a thing. I want to make sure. Yeah, okay. You give me the head nod. Yeah, you and I know how this works, right? With the whole name thing. And as I've always done with every episode, I don't like to do I'm going to read off your CV and all your accomplishments and what you do. I want you to tell us. I want each of you to tell us what your role is, and we're going to get into some of the incredible stuff that you've been doing. Kelly, why don't we start with you?
Okay. So what my role is?
Yes.
So I am currently a new faculty member in biology at Duke University. I recently came from UNC Chapel Hill, where I had spent my entire teaching career. At Duke, I am also the director of undergraduate studies in biology.
Okay. What does that mean?
I am doing some work around the curriculum. So I lead the curriculum committee, and I'm taking a big look at the pedagogy and the design of the curriculum.
Okay. Was it a thing to be stolen from Chapel Hill?
It was a thing.
Well, let's find out how much of a thing it is, because you left your partner in crime back where you started. Viji, why don't you introduce yourself?
So my name's Viji Sathy, and I'm at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and I have been there for 15 years. But prior to that, I had also been there as a grad student and an undergrad, so I know the campus pretty well. I am currently a professor in psychology and neuroscience, but I have a few different hats now that are a little more salient. I'm the Senior Associate Dean for Evaluation and Assessment in our Office of Undergraduate Education. I lead a program that is called the Townsend Program for Education Research, which helps faculty publish, produce research on teaching. And the final hat is I am the director of the Academic Leadership Program, and that is run out of our Institute for Arts and Humanities. And I work with a cohort of faculty every year to explore academic leadership and to really reflect on, these are mid-career faculty, to reflect on what's next for them.
That's a lot of hats.
It is a lot of
Do you miss Kelly?
I do, but we talk a lot, so it's good, but I don't run into her on campus, and we certainly don't have as many committee meetings together.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna start with the book because one of the things one of the things I enjoy about reading books in general, but perhaps maybe books like the ones that you all wrote. And just to remind you all, it's called Inclusive Teaching. It's published by West Virginia Press. You started the journey by talking about being assembled as a group of faculty to reflect on teaching. And if I have my timelines right, this is a time when, yes, there were a lot of centers of teaching and learning encouraging this practice, but it wasn't common, right? It wasn't a sort of expected part of your profession to think about if you are part of the problem or part of if things went well or didn't. And obviously that meeting and that encounter and that gathering that you all had with that group then led to this project. Walk us a little bit through that journey, right? Because let me put this a slightly different way. There are other people who attended the same workshop, right? There are other people who've been, and this is not to cast aspersions on them. This is just to say that something clicked. And I want my audience to hear from you how you went from, it's interesting to think about my class this way to we should write a book about it.
Yeah, and I should also mention my husband was in that group.
Okay.
Already my husband.
Why the clarification needed?
Good things did come out of that group. I would say a lot of people took on leadership roles and did make some really positive changes in their courses and all, but nobody clicked like a long-term friendship and collaboration like Viji and I did.
Yeah, and I think the premise of the group, I remember when you had to apply, you actually applied to be part of the faculty learning community. And I remember thinking, I don't know if I have time for this. I was teaching 3 large classes, and the faculty learning community, as it was set up, was for faculty who taught what are called 100+, so at least 100 students in a classroom. And I was a couple years into teaching, and I thought I'll just put my name in the hat because I did find it challenging to teach that many students.
Did you know Kelly before that?
I did not know Kelly before that. I think a colleague had mentioned that I might like to meet Kelly, but we hadn't really interacted at all until that faculty learning community. But really, I think what clicked, and we talked about this in the book, was observing each other teach. We did triangles in the group and met before and after every observation. But when we saw each other teach, even though it's biology and statistics, not the same subjects at all, it became really apparent that we were kindred spirits in the classroom.
What was apparent?
I think we both don't like to entertain, both don't like to be the center of attention, and we could see in each other that like what we were doing in the classroom was really about the student. It was a student focus. It was about student learning. And we could both feel that sense of like, get the spotlight off me. This is about student learning. And of course, we were having conversations in addition to observing each other. We both actually graduated from college the same year. We were in grad school at the same time at UNC Chapel Hill.
Oh, really?
Didn't know each other then.
Huh.
So we have
Well,
some...
I guess you were in the statistics department on your science.
Psych.
Psych. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was over in the med school. So our paths didn't cross, but we have like similar timelines and even some similar memories, parallel memories. We both were mothers of 2 kids. So there were just a lot of life things that were also in common for us. And then really just started talking about our personalities and how the classroom didn't fit with our personalities the way we had always seen the classroom. With big personalities and charisma and smiles being what students reported as good teaching.
Right, right. So tell me a little bit about that, because what I feel like you just described was you recognize in each other that you're in a similar mental space when you are physically in the classroom. But I guess I want to hear maybe a little bit more about what that space is like. So I know you say you don't like the spotlight on you. I get that. What does that look like in the moment, right? And I know, yes, I know you're thinking about student learning. I get all of the good research around that. But what's the affect that you try to generate in a place where, okay, I don't want the spotlight. I want to be on student learning, but I do also want to cultivate something really special here, and I want them to get that.
Well, I don't know that I definitely didn't have the language for this when we were observing, but I saw a lot of the things that we now have the language for, like instructor talk, really thinking through coaching students through hard ideas, and having them do work, right? Like that was a big part of it too, is there were periods of the class where it was not just that the spotlight wasn't on us, but we were actually in the rows and in the classroom helping students to do things, and giving them feedback and coming back. I mean, I guess I would just say it's more like a facilitator of learning rather than sort of the content dispenser.
Oh, content dispenser, you said? Okay, I thought you said the name Spencer. I don't know why.
And also like hosting, like the way you host a party and you're worried about, is everybody having a good time? Are those people meshing? How can I help the interactions go better? I feel like even with hundreds of students, that's the mindset I'm in. I know I'm not going to reach everybody, but as I'm walking around, I'm trying to gauge, is this going well for them?
Right.
What's the name of that book that clicked for both of us about hosting?
No, I really want to know.
The Art of Gathering?
Yes, The Art of Gathering. Yeah, I think as soon as we read that, we were like, yeah, that's exactly like a classroom for us.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna push you a little bit more here because
I didn't give you the right answer.
No. This is an ungraded class. I had the pleasure several years ago. I can't remember who did it. I think it was a Chronicle, and they had taken a video of you teaching. Am I recalling that correctly? Yeah, and it was as an example, right? Of, if I remember the video correctly, you were facilitating group work, and you would sort of ask questions and get some feedback, and then you had to kind of describe your whole approach, right? And I guess the whole like hosting a party thing is a good metaphor, but it's not just about, at least the way you describe it, it's not just about, well, is everybody okay? It's almost like an extreme form of empathy. So it's almost like in this moment, your all your bandwidth is devoted to everybody's growth, whether it be in having fun at your house party or feeling a sense of belonging and community and growth in the classroom, right? And for me, that has to be above and beyond just not wanting a spotlight on you. There's something else that has to drive that. Is that something you've ever reflected on?
Well, I mean, I do think it goes back to childhood and who I am.
Okay.
I always gravitated towards, even as an older child, I always gravitated back towards the babies and the kids. I was always caretaking. My jobs growing up were camp counselor, piano teacher, tutor. I mean, I had food industry jobs too, but the meaningful ones to me were the ones where I was making connections and helping people and seeing what they needed. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a natural part of who I am. That kind of empathy and putting that into yourself as a teacher, that's a side of your brain that you have to tap into in addition to actually delivering content and knowing what you're doing with the material. So it's a lot of brain space, and I'm not sure I did a good job with that early on, but many years into teaching, it was a place I could tap into in the classroom.
Do you feel like it's half and half, like half your brain is battling content and half your brain is doing the kind of humanism side, like everything you just described?
Yeah, I mean, it probably bounces around. Like right now, I'm developing a new course, so I feel like I have as much space for that human side, but but because I'm an experienced teacher, I know I'm doing okay with it. But I have always taught the same courses over and over and over, which some people can't understand, right? But for me, it's this great experiment. What works, right? Not just in terms of seeing the data and learning, but what works for the students. And what worked 5 years ago isn't what works today because of the pandemic and generational changes. So yeah, I'm always in that space thinking, but it depends how comfortable I am with the course I'm teaching too.
So with that, and Viji, I'll get to you in a second, but with that, since you bring up some of these major events, what are some of the events that have occurred in the last, say, 5-10 years, and how has it impacted the way you approach your students?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know what's generational, like what would have changed as you watch students move through and you stay the same age versus this major, event with COVID and world changes going on. I think, some of the practical things that change are how willing are students to talk to each other, to be engaged with each other. What is their endurance in the classroom for concentration, anxiety, some things that we can name in ways that maybe we weren't naming. Maybe they were always there. Maybe the anxiety was always there. Maybe it's increased. Reading comprehension. How has that changed with technology that these students have grown up with? So those are the things I'm always thinking about. But from the side of what is it like to be people in this generation and in this cohort, as opposed to these kids today, right?
Well, these kids today. Viji, what about you? What have you observed in the last 10 years?
Well, I don't know that. I mean, I think it's a lot of the same things that Kelly has pointed out. I'll also say that during COVID, I shifted roles, and so I have been supporting faculty more in the last few years and not in the classroom as much. And it has been a different set of issues. It's really supporting faculty around the kinds of things that Kelly is talking about. And that, I don't know, sometimes I wonder if anything has changed and it's just our perspective as we get older and have more experience. Because I feel that there are some things where I think the people more senior to me were saying these things before, and I just wasn't hearing it or responding in the same way. But I also think there are unique issues that even the people who are senior to us didn't experience. So I think there's a lot we're going to keep learning about how COVID and all of the kind of social movements we've experienced in the last few years are going to impact student learning.
So in the book, you talked a lot about the ways in which your parents invested in your education and really communicated that, how important that was. Talk to me about, well, I guess both just that eternal love, right, of for investing in you in that way, but also what your experience in education was like and what you've brought forward to your classrooms in your current role.
Well, I grew up in a small town in North Carolina, and I was the only person who looked like me in those classrooms. So I felt like in some ways I did stick out all the time.
I have a presidential candidate who tells the same story, just FYI. No relation, but just saying.
I don't know. I mean, I always felt like I had to prove myself in a lot of settings, but I was also very quiet. And I think especially in a lot of the K through 12 space, that is not a valued trait, to be a listener, to be somebody who allows others to go first. And it's something that I now see as one of my superpowers is to really to listen first. But then it was seen as a detriment and as something I needed to work on, to be raising my hand, to be speaking up, because people saw me as smart, but they didn't see me being vocal about being smart. And so I always felt deficient in educational spaces like that. And I bought into that. I bought into feeling like it was something I needed to work on. But it wasn't until college and really my intro stats class that I got a sense of what a classroom could feel like in terms of moving through challenging material. But the instructor in that course really cared for us as people. And that's not to belittle anyone before that instructor. I think I had a lot of caring instructors, but I saw like how it can look in a particular way. And the example I offer is that I had an offhand remark about being in a concert. I was in concert band at Carolina, and the instructor said, "Oh, when's your concert?" And I mentioned it. And the concert rolled around, and sure enough, she was in the audience listening and came and found me afterwards and said hello. And I just remember being really moved because Carolina's a big place.
The university.
The university is a big place, and you can feel like just one of many there very easily. But it was that experience, and then later. This instructor, wrote in the margins of my paper, "Come see me about grad school." And I walked in and I said, "What's grad school?" And they really just sort of ushered me through the process of trying to figure out if that was the right move for me next. And
Right.
And so it was just that level of care that I experienced in that class that made me get a glimpse of what is possible in a classroom and how you can really change the trajectory of a person's life.
Right.
And so I appreciated that a lot. And it was something I wrestled with when I got into the classroom because I wasn't, unlike this class, which had 25 people, I was now in a room with 200 people. And I had to figure out, how do I show that level of care to 200 people? Because there's just one of me.
Right.
So I think
I'm sure that's
where
a
this
question
came
you
from.
both get a lot when you run workshops. This is great, but I teach 300. What does this look like? Right. How can I meet with every single student for 1 hour? Can I talk to you as an immigrant?
Sure.
Because I'm one too.
Yeah.
You grew up in a small town in North Carolina. But when the front door was closed, were you back in India?
It's hard to say exactly because I didn't spend a lot of time in India. So I would say it was probably a weird mix. I think, we spoke Tamil, which is the language that my family speaks. We ate Indian food. There were a lot of things that you took your shoes off at the front door, like a lot of things that other people were really just, it was a novelty for them to see.
Well, here's why I ask, and I certainly don't want to get into a immigrant versus native-born dynamic, right? But one of the things, and I'm first generation, as you know, one of the things that I can reflect on now, in terms of my history and how things in my history have impacted my journey, is the amount of faith my parents placed in education, right? So to a child growing up, it's just what you do what you're told, right? And part of what you're told is to just do well in school, and I enjoyed it. So, there is that. But I understand now it wasn't just faith in education. It was, the places they can take your offspring that you couldn't travel. And this is me not knowing your parents or anything like that, but I'm just aligning with that that transformative aspect of education. And what was interesting about the story you told about the stats teacher is you didn't mention anything about stats. You didn't mention a p-value, you didn't mention a test, right? And so this is the thing I find so incredible when people tell stories like that the transformative aspect of education most times has nothing to do with the content. This is not to dismiss the content, but it's to kind of dig deep and figure out what's that thing that makes us connect as human, right? And so fast forward a little bit, and I'm gonna say it again because it's a really good book, Inclusive Teaching, West Virginia Press. It's a book about a lot of strategies, and I guess what I like about it is that you give a lot of context to each strategy, but then it's each chapter is bookended with some very kind of practical things. I know that you both do a lot of faculty development around that. So tell us a little bit about that. And then I have some follow-up questions about your experiences doing faculty development.
Yeah, I think our faculty development started because I was being asked to do a couple of workshops around some textbook writing that I was doing, so with Pearson. And then on campus, I had started doing a little bit of professional development, and it's no fun. It's no fun doing it alone. You start to ask, like, well, what do I have to offer, right? We all just have our own perspective. And I did not identify as an education researcher or, a practitioner, certainly. And Viji and I had this friendship that was building, and we decided to try some stuff together and realized how much fun it was. And we balance each other out. As much as we are similar, we balance each other out in good ways, too. Like, my first response to any invitation is, no. And her response to too many things is yes.
But you told me yes. Is that, did I make the cut?
You made the cut. She takes risks. She says yes to a lot of things, sometimes to her own detriment. So we balance each other out in that way. I was probably spinning my wheels trying to make a new thing for everything. And she was like, we can do this more efficiently. We have some expertise in this way, and we don't have to keep reinventing the wheel for every audience. So we got to a place of almost like when you're teaching the same class over and over, and you can start paying attention to all the other things and not designing the content. And that's when it became really fun to be co-teaching together.
Yeah, I'd say that we do balance each other out. And it's fun to have we do, some of these are on the road, so it's fun to have a travel buddy to do this work with. And both as Kelly said, we both have children, so there's a lot that, there's a lot of enjoyment that comes out of traveling together too, when you're away from your family and you have, it's a different work. It's not the same kind of work, but it's a chance to kind of explore. I always joke that it's like the college tour I never got, in that we really just went to a couple schools and they were all, a couple hours from my house. So it's a chance for me to affirm the choices I made, but also just to have a chance to see what the country looks like, really, literally, and with a friend, which is always fun. I mean, I think it would be really hard to do on my own, and I definitely would say no more if it was just by myself. But we managed to find fun things to do. So.
Well, and I think we're in such sync when we're together in teaching mode. Like, I can read her brain, she can read mine. When we were first getting started, while she was, engaged with the audience, I would be looking around and seeing like, oh, they laughed at that. Viji, that's a funny one. Keep saying that. Or, oh, they're really nodding their heads. Like, whatever you just said there was like really got them. And those were the pieces that made it into our book. And that's how we shaped. The workshop was always shifting a little bit. Every time we'd sit down and be like, okay, we need to change that slightly. We want to spend another 2 minutes on this, right? And so it was like honing it to a place where we're like, this really resonates with a lot of people. And even though we're two women in STEM, it seems to be resonating with people in humanities, which we think is pretty terrific.
So what are some of the things you've seen out there in terms of when institutions request that you come? What have you seen in terms of like what their needs are, I guess what they think their needs are and what their real needs are, levels of receptivity to this kind of thinking? And I'm saying this knowing that generally requires the one who shows up, right? But to the extent that you can detect what the national landscape is for this kind of work, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'd say you're right that oftentimes there are people who are interested in teaching that show up at the workshops. But we've done a lot of workshops, too, where it is just faculty development day and everybody who is part of the campus is part of the event. So I think, in general, the pieces that people really feel appreciative of are, we sort of lay out the lens with which we want people to see teaching. And to think about their role in the classroom as a person who can help level the playing field for students. that often gets people sort of open to the idea, and then we dig in a little deeper about some of the tweaks that they can make to their teaching. And I think this is the part where, we mentioned this too, that, we had been to some faculty development workshops ourselves, and we'd encounter good ideas, energizing ideas, but then we'd leave and we'd say, well, what are we supposed to do with that? How does it look in practicality? And I think because we're two scientists and we're very we want to get into it, right? Like we want to
like
actually
formulas.
Exactly. And not just that it has to be boring, but just like we need the clear takeaways. And so I think that's where we focused, was really helping faculty to have the clear takeaways from a session, so it feels useful when you've spent your 60 or 90 minutes with us, that you've got something you can take away and practice and explore. I mean, I think that's my goal, is that a person leaves understanding why it's important and they have some strategies in their toolkit.
What have you seen in terms of institutional support?
From the campuses we visit?
Yeah, and maybe just some more context to the question, because to be honest with you, and you all know I do what you do as well, and I'm always in two minds about it. Like, so on one hand, I thoroughly enjoy it, and I'm really grateful for the campuses who've invited me to give keynotes and run workshops. But what I also see a lot of is very motivated, really good, very well-meaning faculty who deep down really want to do the right thing, but are part of departments or institutions that has not yet figured out how to properly reward, incentivize, and basically respect the profession of college teaching. And so I worry a little bit sometimes that, we can get all the hundreds of thousands of teaching faculty motivated, but if there's still significant pay differentials, if you still can't vote in faculty senate, if you're still, on 1 year contract, I mean, if those conditions aren't changed, then there is there's a ceiling, right, for the level of effectiveness this can be. And so, without trying to do everything all at once, I do try to spend some time working on some institutional change projects. And so I guess from that lens, I'm wondering, what have you detected in terms of campuses saying, no, we're not just going to bring you here to do a nice 90 minutes and hope those low-paid adjuncts go back and feel great about their class. We're actually doing all these other things to communicate that, no, this is our core product, and we're going to show that we value it.
Yeah, well, we are sort of a one-off when we go, right? So it's hard to know.
It's not your job to do.
It's hard to know always what's going on. Since we've written the book, we know that many times there is a group that's reading the book, and so they're getting together multiple times, and then we come in at the end or before. So that's probably the easiest one for us to see. There are times when a department brings us in, and we actually enjoy those the most, because it feels like that's where the work happens. I've been a part of a lot of other institutional project changes, and the department is the level where some of that initially happens. And it starts with a leader in that department that recognizes some things have to change, right? And oftentimes you get the turnout of the faculty that you might normally not see if the campus hosts some big teaching and learning event. I'd say that other times the provost invites us, and I think that sends a message. But it's hard to know as outsiders how much of that sticks and how that is part of a bigger institutional change.
Yeah, and I respect the question about, are we just treating the fish? Or are we actually thinking about the water that they're in and how it can be difficult for people to navigate, especially, as you say, that I don't know that there are many institutions, if any, that are doing an outstanding job with valuing college teaching. But I think we drop sort of breadcrumbs for people about the kinds of things they could think about. So we do talk about a dashboard we helped to develop on campus, on UNC's campus, to look at equity in grades at the end of the semester. There are some things where I think we we recognize that most of the people we're talking to are practitioners, and we want to offer those practitioners things to take away. But we also want the leaders in the room to hear some of the ideas that might bring some of that culture change you're talking about. And there are sometimes institutions that have us as part of a whole day of meeting with different stakeholders and talking to people, and those are fun conversations when we can say, what are you working on in your areas, and how can we help you move them a little further along? And teaching evaluation is definitely one big area, and promotion of teaching faculty. I think there's a lot. There's so much work to be done, but we have definitely made a lot of our focus on the practitioner.
Getting that starfish back into the water.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of times when we talk to those folks, we say things like, well, how are you a change agent? What are the ways you're like being a sneaky change agent, which is still not changing the whole system. You're still focused on one person and some practical ideas. But, you know, whether that's like inviting someone to come to your class not because you need their feedback, but because you want them to see what a classroom can look like and how it's different, and asking for their feedback on that. So a lot of times we'll be talking to people who want to be making change in their role in some way and are looking for this community outside of their department or outside of their university, saying like, how did you get change in your space?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I to balance my own line of thinking, one of the points that I try to communicate is sometimes in higher ed, or I guess in other places too as well, but sometimes there's this obsession about how little power you have, right? So if you're a student, you're not as powerful as the faculty. If you're assistant professor, not as powerful as the associate. And then, and then even presidents say, well, I'm not the board of trustees, and so I can't, And so you can easily find people who have more capital than you, but maybe a way to reframe that is think about the capital that you do have, and you still have a chance to make change even if it's in your own classroom. Kelly, talk to me a little bit about the data set that you sat on, that you ended up working with our mutual friend, Sarah Eddy, looking at disproportionate pass rates. And so just walk us through that process of seeing the data, looking into it, sitting with it, deciding to make changes.
Yeah, so it all sort of happened by coincidence that a colleague at our Center for Teaching and Learning at UNC Chapel Hill had gotten his hands on some data for big classes across campus. And Biology 101 was on there. At that time, there were only 2 sections being taught every semester, and I was teaching half or more than half of them. So when I saw the data that showed these discrepancies based on race and ethnicity, I couldn't look away. They were mine, right? I had to own them. And I'd never seen data like that from any kind of class. And here I was looking at really disappointing disparities in my own classroom. And on some level, overall, you're just looking at failure rates. And you're like, oh, that's bad. I should know I'm failing that many students. But then you see it broken down. And you're like, oh, that is just unfair. And I often describe it like a punch in the gut. Yet at the same time, I was being told I was a good teacher, right? By colleagues, by students. So lots of good teachers walking around out there that may not know that there are these discrepancies in their own classroom.
So prior to you seeing that data set, what knowledge, if any, did you have of the failure rates?
I mean, I had, you submit grades, you look at a spreadsheet, right?
But you don't get like a 25% cut Fs.
So, I mean, grading is this whole other area, right? When I first came on board, I didn't know anything about teaching really large classes. I'd never even been in one. And I got advice from someone in the chemistry department that I should use a normal curve. So I did.
Our resident statistician will tell us what.
And I'm so disappointed in past self for that, And of course, you look around at all the other professors teaching, and it's like, that's what we do in STEM.
Well, it could be worse. I had a biochem teacher who told us 90% of you will fail, and he was right. So would that be left skewed, right skewed? I forgot my 101 stats. Viji, you have to forgive me. So there's that. You could do that. Yeah. But so normal is a step up, but
Okay.
not what you
Well, it doesn't
want to
feel
do.
good.
I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
So I think I was coming from this place of like this traditional STEM field where you're like, of course, it's normal for lots of your students to fail, right? Then you look at the data and you're like, is it normal for these students to be the ones failing,
Right.
And that's a
Because
different.
something else becomes predictive, right?
Yeah. And so I really had to, as you say, sit with it, and my intuition was, what did I do? What did I do wrong? What can I fix? Which, looking back on it, that's just who I am. But looking back on it, I guess the alternative was to blame the students, right?
Because a lot of people would have looked at that same data set and like, well, hopefully get a better set next year.
So, I mean, knowing the colleague that showed me the data, he selected me. Having known me already.
Right. Knowing that you would react in a
Right.
certain way. Yeah.
But, we both didn't know where it would go. And I said, well, I am thinking about making some changes. And, this is definitely feeding into some of the changes I think I need to make. And he said, well, let's collect some data before you make that change. Let's at least do a survey. We can get some initial statistics when you make the change. And we had some initial data right away. So I was sitting on a data set that the Center for Teaching and Learning helped me with.
As in your classes still?
From my classes, yeah. And I had no idea what to do with them. I was a molecular biologist geneticist, right? Even the data set was too big and confusing for me to work with on my own. But I went to a conference, the SABRE conference that biologist education researchers go to, and I figured I'll put a poster together, and the people at the Center for Teaching and Learning helped me. And the poster, laid out this idea that there was a discrepancy, but there was a fix as well, that we had closed some gaps between first-gen and non-first-gen students, that we had made improvements along race and ethnicity. And I was at this poster session, and not long before, Scott Freeman had a paper came out that looked at very similar things, looking at discrepancies and fixes for them with increased course structure. And I got to the meeting, and I said, okay, I'm going to be brave. I'm going to walk up to Scott Freeman. And I didn't know anything about him, but I said, I'd love for you to come by my poster because I think I replicated some of the work that you have done. And from the walk from where he was to my poster, we had a chance to talk for a minute, and he goes, oh, this is not a replication. This is so exciting. You have a different population of students, and I have to look at what you've done. And like 10 minutes later, he was like, what can I do? What can I do to help you? How do we get this out into the world? And I said, I need a mentor. And then like within an hour.
I'm a statistician.
Yeah, exactly. And then the more he thought about it, he came back to me an hour later. He's like, how about a postdoc? Would a postdoc help you get this work out in the field? And I was like, yeah. And so he introduced me to Sarah Eddy, who was a postdoc at the time for him. We sat at a high-top table at the conference center, and before long we had a plan for, getting the institutional data directly to her and what we were going to do with it. And
So you talked about having the numbers. Do you have any qualitative data from the students, either from when things were low persistence or afterwards, about the experience, about what it meant to be like in the classroom, things like that?
yeah, so that's where the data that the colleague from Center of Teaching and Learning suggested, let's do a survey. I ask questions around community and belonging and things like that. I mean, in hindsight, I probably would have asked other questions as well. But one of the things we did see was an increased sense of community. We saw students close what we would call like a discussion gap, like the ability to feel comfortable talking in class, right? And that comes from that the mode wasn't just raise your hand and talk to 400 people. The mode became talking to each other, things like that.
Okay. Did you have a big data set, Viji?
I always have big data sets.
Did you need a statistician's help? You need to phone a friend.
Actually, you had a collaborator.
Yeah, no, I my problem is having too much data all the time. wanting to ask all the questions.
Well, after a certain number, everything gets significant, right? So
It's true. It's true.
well, what I'm a little bit more familiar with Kelly's history, not maybe a personal history, but just the kind of issues we have in bio, because that's my field as well. Not as much as an intro stats. I mean, I know your story. I've known your story for a while, and I know you teach stats now. What are some of the challenges, I guess, other than maybe fixed mindset around quantitative subjects that students have? What are some of the challenges that you've encountered and that you've helped kind of overcome?
I think, well, the fixed mindset was huge. And because I teach statistics within psychology and neuroscience, it's one of the required courses. So students don't always understand why it's important to learn the subject matter. But like I said, that was the class that was sort of the turning point for me. And especially as somebody who appreciated my math classes but didn't really understand the point of them. Statistics made it real, what this could be used for. So I hope to spark a little bit of that for my students. The other thing is that at least on our campus, and it might be more universally, our psychology, we just recently added neuroscience, but so psychology in general has a lot, it's more, there's more enrollment from women than men. So I'd say like 75% of my class were people who identified as women. And I had a unique opportunity in a quantitative class to really bring more women into the field to sort of help them see their place, potential place in the field. But I think for me, the main driver was I wanted them to see there was a point in doing all of this work. And that they could appreciate. I always say, like, the lessons at the end of the semester, I'd give them some takeaways. And one of the takeaways is you either really love it and you want to continue doing it or explore it, or you know when to call a statistician. Like, you know that this is the time that not to take it on yourself.
Like Kelly.
And those are the things that I really wanted my students to have a basic level of understanding because you can open a paper and there's a graph there. It doesn't mean that it's a good graph. So I think there's some basic literacy that I wanted them to have around quantitative material too, because I do think it should be, and I've always said this. I think stats should be required of every student, just because we're such a numerically oriented. I mean, we can be pretty numerically oriented.
Yeah, one of my biggest regrets coming out of undergrad was never having taken a stats class. It was optional. Calc was required, but it was optional. So I tried to make up for it by taking like 15 credits of stats in grad school. I think it got me good enough to be dangerous and like, somewhat literate at looking at what SPS has spat out. But, but yeah, as you get more into it, it just really helps you understand the world. Because even you talking about the students, right? I just think of simple stuff like you're watching TV and you see something that says 2 out of 3 doctors recommend this. Okay, well, was it 3 doctors? Was it 300? But you don't get that information. You just get that, and so just having the mind to hear that and know how to critically analyze, hear that message. Tell me a little bit. I want to ask this in a way that doesn't, put you in any real hot water. It's not a trap question. That's just not my style, right? But we are doing the kind of work we do in a very different political landscape than, say, even 3-4 years ago. I think some of us saw it coming, right? And I think universities, for the most part, at least in my experience, are still very much interested in having these conversations. I would say that the way a lot of times the way I choose to have the conversation has always been a little bit different to maybe some, which takes some of the spotlight away from it in terms of language, etc. But that being said, I understand the fear that some people have within, right? And so I'm feeling daily calls on how do I talk about this in my class? How should I change my syllabus? Some people moving, right? What has been your experience, both personally, but also as you kind of evangelize this work?
I mean, we are in a state where people are questioning DEI generally. And, when we started to write this book, when we were doing workshops, I never would have thought that the word inclusive would be something we would attack. So, I mean, I recognize now that might be a little naive, but it felt like, especially the way we were talking about it, it felt like how could you take issue with making sure that every student in your classroom feels like they belong, and that you do everything you can to help people not just understand the material, but to really grow as a student and as a person. So I think there are some parts of it that I even still today, I'm like, if you actually read the book, I'm not sure you would take issue with the way we're talking about things. But that's not how sound bites work. That's not how.
Why would I read your book?
Yeah, that's just not how people have been generally talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the media, at least. So I think there's some parts of it that are hard to hear, just because it is. This is something we're both passionate about. So it's not great when you feel like that is under attack. But at the same time, I will say, we continue to do our work. We continue to be, our colleagues really value what we do, and so I see a place for it. I see there are things that we can continue doing, but sometimes it does feel like we have to kind of go in stealth mode and really think about the words, even the title of the session at some schools that we go to, right? Like, it's not fair, but at the same time, we want to keep doing the work. So I think that's where we are.
Let me ask you a quick follow-up, if it's okay, because I'll tell you about an experience I had recently. I was at a campus which I'll not name, and someone came up to me near the end of the day, right, and said, I just want you to know that I'm a conservative, I'm a Republican, and I generally feel very attacked on this campus. And I really want to thank you for making me feel welcome during this day, right? And, obviously I was appreciative of the comment, but it also got me thinking about even what you're just saying about, you're right. If people read your book, like, how could you disagree with wanting to include every student? So then I start wondering, well, okay, in theory, that's a point we should all agree on, but in practice, they could still see books like yours, like books like mine, and see it as a source of attack. That the journey towards that inclusive space is it means that people who identify a certain way get spotlight. And this is not what you've done in the book, but I'm saying this is how it can be perceived. So we know what we want in theory, and we know what we want in practice. What is the messaging that's needed, right? So that people who maybe have not been historically marginalized, but see our collective push to getting the marginalized included as an attack on them, right? What's the communication we need to have so that doesn't necessarily happen, or at least they feel kind of part of the same journey. And that to me is a bigger challenge of this work that honestly I don't really think a lot of people take up, right? I think sometimes it's a little bit of, well, how could you debate this? It's equity, right? Like, well, yeah, it is, yes, but I'm trying to be like super empathetic and thinking of what people are hearing when they hear the term. That's the thing we have to speak to.
We try and use a lot of analogies and identities that everybody can relate to that are not about marginalized, racialized identities. We talk a lot about being introverts versus extroverts. We talk about like what it means to have universal design in an airport and how that helps everybody, right? But it certainly helps
you
some
hear
people
that, LAX? Go on.
So, I mean, I think it is trying to find some common ground to start the conversation in a way that doesn't feel like people are being attacked and doesn't start with the words that are already feeling like, oh, that's part of that inflammatory conversation I don't want to have. Some people are afraid to have conversations about race, gender identities. So
Could I interrupt you
Yeah.
just really quickly? Because then here's the other challenge with everything you're saying. Do some people who are marginalized and still are feel that their marginalization is being dismissed?
Yep.
Because now you have to use this sort of centrist language, right? I'm not asking this as I have an answer for you. I'm asking this as this is the challenge, right? To live in both spaces as trying to communicate this very valuable point.
Yeah, and obviously that's not my lived experience.
I wouldn't say obviously, but
Yeah, it's not my lived experience. I hear that, and I think that's why it's so great that we're an army and a diverse group of people that are doing this work, right? Because people will receive the message differently with
Right.
who's saying it, the space they're in for being ready to listen, the entry point. Yeah, and I think that is a criticism, certainly, that you could make of our work, that it is too centrist, right? And yeah, that's a bit of a lens that we take at times to welcome people into this space to keep moving deeper.
Yeah,
What do you
I think I feel a little bit differently in that, there are times where I think I don't want to shy away from the harder issues and not shy away. That's not the right word, but just I do want that to be sometimes a focus. But I also recognize that, just the same way that when we are in the classroom, we have the students we have. And the goal is to get them to a certain place. And I see that the same way with faculty development work. We have the faculty we have. So how do we, as Kelly says, open the door for them to really think about some of these issues in a different way? And it turns out that sometimes when you put a spotlight on a group or a personality or, something, there's like this aha moment for people. Oh, I was like that in the classroom, or this would be better for me if it were this way, right? Like whatever it is that gets people just open to the possibility, then you think, okay, great. Now you're going to have all these other byproducts as a result of doing these things, right? But I do see us as sort of this entry point for some people to kind of think about, is what I'm doing something that is maybe not helping all students to succeed, and can we change something that might help more students to succeed? But going back to your original question, I mean, I think a lot of this has to do with, is this a zero-sum game? Do people stand to lose when we have equity? And I think that's a larger question that no one seems to be willing to take. Like, I think people are – some people have the idea that, yes, people will lose when we have equity. And some people are like, no, actually.
And how do you define loss?
Yeah, right.
Because having less doesn't necessarily mean loss.
Yeah. So I think there are bigger questions about whether or not we're ready to say that all students deserve to have a good learning experience and to really succeed, whatever that success looks like.
Yeah. Man, I could run down so many rabbit holes right now. Well, going back to immigrant Brian, right? I guess one of the things that I think I feel a little fortunate in the sense that I grew up in a different cultural context, but I have now lived for 25 years in the U.S. context as a black male, right? And when I walk down the street, no one looks at me and says, ooh, there's a Trinidadian. He must have a different experience. Now, as a sidebar, I just want to use that to make the point, like, we should all be careful when we use terms like black, white, and because it masks so much nuance and stuff like that, right? But what that means is when I'm having these conversations, I'm having them partly from lived experience, but partly from being an observer. Somebody, can speak about this kind of intellectually and at a distance, and I can put it to bed when I come home and, I'm with my family. And I know for some colleagues who is pretty much 100% lived experience, it's just too emotional. It's really tough for them to move to the center because they, as Jonathan Haidt would say, the elephant, right, keeps kind of pulling them back because I remember an older black gentleman told me one day, it's like, he said to me, white supremacy defined my life. Right now, I don't use the words white supremacy when I give talks and stuff like that, but kind of listening to him and explain that, I understand why he needs certain messages to communicate something in that space. I guess that's just my long way of saying is that acknowledge the challenge, and it seems like you do as well. All right, let me get you out to you on this one. So 10 years from now, I run into you. I know you'll still be best friends.
That is true. That is the only thing I know, actually, about 10 years from
What? No. You. What would you say? And this is not like nothing's definite, right? Who knows the future? But okay, let me ask the question this way: what would you like to have seen happen in 10 years? Not necessarily for Viji or for Kelly, right? But just for the kinds of issues that you're working on. And maybe if you're brave enough, tell us where you see yourself, what role you are playing in making that happen. Dun, 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 dun. That's a Jeopardy music for those who don't.
Well, I'll be optimistic. I will say I hope 10 years from now we figure out this whole teaching evaluation crap that we're in. That I think there's great work happening, lots of grants around this. I think we'll have a better sense, better tools, better ways, but technology hopefully will help us.
Why teaching eval specifically?
Teaching evals because it's an area that I spend some of my time thinking about in my role, and just how challenging it is to improve as an educator and to think about the way academia is set up without really accurately assessing that. But also, I would hope that teaching is more valued generally, but I think I feel less.
You don't sound very optimistic about that.
I think
10 years not enough time.
I think it's harder to imagine how that change will come about. So I can think more concrete steps about things that could actually change, and people are having conversations about. Lots of ways data will help us to illuminate disparities, but also maybe some of the solutions to the challenges that we face. But I don't know. I don't know what else, because in some ways in academia things move slow and they move fast. I don't know. There are some things that all of a sudden we're doing things differently than we have been doing, but the basic ideas are pretty much the same as they've been.
Yeah, it's true. 10 years doesn't feel like it'll be that different. That being said, I'm very optimistic about new faculty. I'm seeing new assistant faculty whose main role is research, but they're coming in with knowledge about teaching. They're coming in about enthusiasm in a way that I think wasn't there. Now, hopefully it won't get squashed by the system, right, that says, don't spend your time on teaching, because plenty of colleagues are still told, don't spend any extra time on teaching, right? And so we have to fight that a bit so that, as you said, it's not just the people that are the adjuncts and the fixed-term faculty who are the ones taking care of teaching, and we have these hierarchies in higher ed that, the folks that are doing research as their main job aren't also improving their teaching and equity for students.
A nice ray of light. I share your optimism, honestly, and I think it's a benefit, and I hope you. It sounds like you feel the same of being able to travel and do this work. I've seen a lot of good things in places where, in fact, what I feel like I've seen is places that are actually doing better than even they think they're doing, because it's almost as though we're wired to see the what's, but because I have that comparative lens, like their campus is not even having this conversation. At least you're all fighting about, at least it's going back and forth. I think of places like, Worcester Polytechnic, which flattened the tenure stream between research and teaching. And, I think about places like Valencia College and all that. I know of actually examples where teaching is valued and there are real proofs of principle of what it could look like. So I'm cautiously optimistic. What's your next book going to be?
It's going to be an edited volume. Or something.
I love how you all laughed at the exact same time.
This is like asking somebody who just gave birth, when's the next baby coming? Nope. Too soon. It's too soon.
Well, the way we wrote the first one was our experience getting out on campuses is what led to writing the book. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had material.
Right.
And right now, we're still doing a lot of the same kind of work. So I think we're waiting to see when things feel different and we have more to say. We're not out there just trying to say stuff. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I do think we would like to get into the public space a bit more. We've written some more public articles. We had something in the newspaper, local newspaper.
Like an op-ed, yeah.
Yeah. We really want to bring this message, this is about student success. Let's not villainize all these words.
Right. Kelly, Viji, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
한겨울밤 동안 시간을 보내 차가운 바람은
Knowledge Unbound is brought to you by the Rios Institute for Racially Just, Inclusive, Open STEM Education. We are generously funded by the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. I want to thank my producer, Mr. Segev Amasai. Did you enjoy the episode, Segev?
Yes, I did.
Can you imagine what it would be like if you had every class had professors like that?
Honestly, well, with the things that are going on right now, I definitely think a change is needed, and that's what you guys are here for.
I'm gonna organize a transfer for you to Kelly Hogan's class.
Sure.
Yeah, it was really fun talking to them, man, and good luck in your finals, the ones you haven't taken yet.
Thank you.
Definitely want to thank Kelly and Viji, good friends of mine, great people, good writers who really bared their soul to put what it means to grow into inclusive teachers. And I think you might remember we talked about this in the episode, but it's also in their book about how their partnership became solid from a professional development opportunity at UNC Chapel Hill, where they both were at one time. And maybe that's my takeaway lesson for you. Wherever you are, find your community, find your people who share your beliefs, who can remind you that you're not crazy, and with whom you could perhaps start building that critical mass, because that's how change is going to happen. So until the next episode, where we'll get into another wonderful conversation, I ask, be excellent to each other.
빛나는 별들이 오늘 이 밤을 추억에 비춰
You know, when we started to write this book, when we were doing workshops, I never would have thought that the word inclusive would be something we would attack. So, I mean, I recognize now that might be a little naive, but it felt like, especially the way we were talking about it, it felt like, how could you take issue with making sure that every student in your classroom feels like they belong, and that you do everything you can to help people not just understand the material, but to really grow as a student and as a person. So I think there are some parts of it that I even still today, I'm like, if you actually read the book, I'm not sure you would take issue with the way we're talking about things.
우릴 위해서 창밖엔 하얀 눈이 내려요 잠 못 이루도록